Before 1928, if ever a police officer in a vehicle had to contact the station, they had to find a phone booth, or borrow a telephone, or find a police box. But if the station had to contact the officer in the vehicle, they had to stand on the street corner and flag him down. But in 1928, all that changed. The Detroit, Michigan Police Department became the first in the world to equip their police cars with radio receivers. The officers still could not contact the station, but the station could broadcast to their cars. They knew the patrol area of each car and could call out the number of the car they wanted to contact. But if it was a significant emergency, they needed to contact all the vehicles at once. And thus the phrase was born, calling all cars. Calling all cars became sort of a catchphrase in the late 20s and early 30s with gangsters and bootleggers all around. They kept the police departments busy when they created the concept of a car chase. And from 1933 until 1939, the Rio Grande Oil Company sponsored a radio show called Calling All Cars. And it was a police dramatization show. Many aficionados of radio dramas will often point out that this was a predecessor to the famous Dragnet, which of course later became a television show, and you can see behind me here the Dragnet board game. And at least one movie was produced based on the radio show Calling All Cars. Vintage cartoons and comics picked up on the phrase anytime it was time to mobilize law enforcement for some emergency. Now, Parker Brothers, always on the lookout for the latest trend that they could jump on board with another board game, decided to publish a game in 1938 called Calling All Cars. The game had very little to do with police action, with police radios or even car chases. The game board, as you see here, depicted 4 separate identical routes from the corners of the board to the center, which was headquarters, and those routes were divided into an equal number of squares. The real functional part of the game was the spinner, or spinners. This one is from a later edition. I'm not sure how it got into my 1938 copy, but this little spinner here would pick out which car was to react to the spin, and one of the spaces is calling all cars, so that all cars would react to it. And then the big spinner would tell you what happened. For example, I just spin, move ahead 1. It's a spin and move game. Everything is pretty much completely random. But it was exciting enough to continue to stay in the Parker Brothers catalog well into the 1960s. Of course, there were several additions. The boards pretty much stayed the same, a little change in color, a little bit different artwork in the corners. The boxes changed. The various colors on the boxes seemed to be sort of random. I think they probably just used whatever ink was available, the cheapest. This particular edition here with the rather sinister-looking officers on it was selling in 1955 at Montgomery Ward's for the ripe sum of 89 cents. The final run in the early 1960s sported this kind of Picasso-ish looking fellow. In fact, I've seen some of the collectors refer to him as Officer Picasso. The board, the spinners, even the little race cars ended up unchanged pretty much for that entire 25-year run. That is another point to make. These little cars here are definitely race cars, not police cars. I guess that must have added to the excitement, but I don't know of a police force that had these kind of cars on the force. Even though the phrase calling all cars has no practical application anymore, everybody seems to know what it means. And of course, it's another example of the game industry reflecting popular culture at the time. And now this old game is finding its way into antique stores and collector shelves, and it still can be spotted once in a while in old dusty, musty basement shelves and boxes of old toys in garages. So if you're in that rare mood when you want to play a 90-year-old spin and move race game, this is a choice that definitely is open to you. But whatever you play, be sure to play every day.
The high-powered limousine is the gangster's best friend, a swift and lethal plaything.